yeah, so we'll try that now. I have, here's one of our ant friends over here on my paper. I received an email from a friend a few days ago, and I wanted to share it. I thought it was a real neat email. Her name is Marissa. She lives in Hudson. And she sent me something from the sisters at a covenant in La Crosse, the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, who have had at least one sister at their altar in perpetual prayer since the 1870s. I think that's really cool. Someone has just been there around the clock since the 1870s. And how beautiful. And she read through this post by this Franciscan nun, and she thought to send it to me, so I was very appreciative to get it. It is called, so this was written by the nun, it is called Finding Mystery in the Fog by Sister Amy Taylor, written on Monday, April 11th, 2016, so just, 2 weeks ago. The weather here in Wisconsin has been a bit confusing lately. One morning it is sunny with unseasonably warm temperatures, and the next it's cloudy and flurries are blowing through the trees. And on several recent mornings I have encountered fog. I find fog has a variety of effects on me. Frustration and fear because I can no longer see what is in front of me. Wonder as I watch it crawl across the Mississippi River. And inspiration when I see the first sunbeams reveal the beauty around me. If we are willing to acknowledge it, fog has the ability to be a gift and offer moments of transformation. It invites all of us to slow down and be present to what is right in front of us. When we walk or drive through fog, the way forward can be revealed in small sections of the walk or drive through fog. The way forward can be revealed in small sections of the roadway. We have to rely on that now moment, not what we see a few minutes down the roadway, but what is right in front of us. We can't spend time looking back or too far forward. Have you ever thought about how fog can be a gift found in your discernment journey? Discernment can be filled with many foggy moments, moments in which we want to see through it, to know what we will encounter. Fog can be a symbol of the mystery that we walk in each day as we discern the next part of our life journey. Perhaps in these foggy moments we can take time to pause and ponder what the now moment is inviting us to. Can you find your own mystery in the fog? So I just love that little piece from Sister Amy Taylor. And somehow knowing that she is part of a lineage who has been maintaining perpetual prayer since 1870 in that spot, I just find really kind of beautiful. I don't have a background as a Catholic, but I think anybody can look at that and just say, wow, that's pretty special. That's pretty beautiful stuff. I also like one of the words she used, or one of the phrases she used here. Let me see if I can find it. Have you ever thought about how fog can be a gift found in your discernment journey? And I like that term, discernment journey, because I think that's kind of what we're all on. We're all sort of moving through. Sometimes there's fog, sometimes there isn't, but really we're going through, we're trying to discern what's of value, what isn't of value, what's important, what should I focus on, what should I let go of. So I like that term discernment journey, because I think we're all on it. And then I wanted to, before we go into the kind of into the meat of the teaching for today, I've got a handout for today. But before we go into that, I want to read you another piece of text by Sagyal Rinpoche. This is from his book called Glimpse of the Day, or from his piece called Glimpse of the Day. He is a Tibetan monk, practices in the Tibetan tradition. So there's slight variations between like Zen and Tibetan and Theravadan and all these different kind of offshoots. There's sort of minor differences, but they're all pretty similar. But some of these different people have different titles that would be roughly the equivalent to like a reverend or a father or a priest, you know, that kind of thing. So it depends on the sect. So anyway, he is of the Tibetan lineage. And in this piece he talks about ego a little bit. And I think this is helpful. Ego is the absence of true knowledge of who we really are, together with its result, a doomed clutching on at all costs to a cobbled together and makeshift image of ourselves, an inevitably chameleon, charlatan self that keeps changing and has to keep alive the fiction of its existence. In Tibetan, ego is called dak-dzin, which means grasping to a self. Ego is then defined as incessant movements of grasping at a delusory notion of I and mine, self and other, and all the components, concepts, ideas, desires, and activities that will sustain that false construction. Such grasping is futile from the start and condemned to frustration, for there is no basis or truth in it. And what we are grasping at is by its very nature ungraspable. The fact that we need to grasp at all and to go on grasping shows that in the depths of our being we know that the self doesn't inherently exist. From this secret, unnerving knowledge spring all our fundamental insecurities and fears. Lifetimes of ignorance have brought us to identify the whole of our being with ego. Its greatest triumph is to inveigle us into believing its best interests are our best interests, and even into identifying our very survival with its own. This is a savage irony. Consider that ego and its grasping are at the root of all our suffering. Yet ego is so terribly convincing, and we have been its dupe for so long, that the thought that we might ever become egoless terrifies us. To be egoless, ego whispers to us, is to lose all the rich romance of being human, to be reduced to a colorless robot or a brain-dead vegetable. To end the bizarre tyranny of ego is why we take the spiritual path. But the resourcefulness of ego is almost infinite, and it can, at every stage, sabotage and pervert our desire to be free of it. The truth is simple, and the teachings are extremely clear, but I have seen again and again with great sadness that as soon as they begin to touch and move us, ego tries to complicate them, because it knows it is fundamentally threatened. However hard ego may try to sabotage the spiritual truth, if you really continue on it and work deeply with the practice of meditation, you will begin to slowly realize just how gulled you have been by the ego's promises, false hopes, and false fears. Slowly you begin to understand that both hope and fear are enemies of your peace of mind. Hopes deceive you and leave you empty and disappointed, and fears paralyze you in the narrow cell of your false identity. You begin to see also just how all-encompassing the sway of ego has been over your mind, and in the space of freedom opened up by meditation, when you are momentarily released from grasping, you glimpse the exhilarating spaciousness of your true nature. Two people have been living in you all your life. One is the ego, garrulous, demanding, hysterical, calculating. The other is the hidden spiritual being whose still voice of wisdom you have only rarely heard or attended to. As you listen more and more to the teachings, contemplate them, and integrate them into your life, your inner voice, your innate wisdom of discernment, what we call in Buddhism discriminating awareness, is awakened and strengthened, and you begin to distinguish between its guidance and the various clamorous and enthralling voices of ego. The memory of your real nature, with all its splendor and confidence, begins to return to you. You will find, in fact, that you have uncovered in yourself your own wise guide, and as the voice of your wise guide or discriminating awareness grows stronger and clearer, you will start to distinguish between its truth and the various deceptions of the ego, and you'll be able to listen to it with discernment and confidence. I think that's beautiful. Talking about the ego. And sometimes, we talk about the ego, and we talk about the ego especially as it relates to attachment. And really, ego and attachment go hand in hand. You can't be attached without the ego. Otherwise, it is, there can be desire, there can be, I want this, I want that, I'd like to achieve this, I'd like to achieve that. But in the absence of the ego, that's not attachment. Those are just things that we want, goals we set, they're rational, they make sense, they're things we're going after. As soon as the ego gets involved, though, that stuff starts to change a little bit. And we can feel that. We've all had little moments of where when the ego seems to get, it kind of wiggles its way into the situation, and we start to think, I wonder how I'll be looked upon if this happens, or I'll wonder what people will think if I don't do this, or I wonder what people will think if I change my mind about that. So the ego kind of gets in there, and then you can't help because now you've got this other thing you're thinking about. You're no longer thinking from the wisdom mind, which is kind of that impartial, on-looking awareness that is able to look at things and just objectively evaluate them and say, this would be a good thing for you and for others. This would be a healthy thing for you and for others. But as long as we're stuck with kind of running it through the ego or looking at it through the lens of the ego, it always distorts it just enough that we don't really get a clear picture of it. And that's where so much of the suffering we experience comes from.
Is he's still alive?
I believe he is, yes.
So was he a psychiatrist or psychologist of some kind?
I'm not sure of his background.
The reason I ask is because it seems like, wasn't it Freud in that time when they started to name id, ego, superego?
Mm-hmm.
And he's relating that to things from 6 million years ago. Or,
mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting how much of kind of Western psychology has taken its roots in this stuff.
Yeah.
That there's an ancient text called the Abhidhamma, which is about 2,000 years old or so, that really contains a lot of modern modern psychology in it, and what we still teach and learn to this day. But the lessons are wonderful. But I think I think about the ego, and You know, I mean, we all have one. We've all got this ego self that, thanks, honey, I appreciate that. We've all got this egocentric self that on the one hand, it sort of convinces us that it's on our side because it's looking out for our best interest, you know. It's going to make sure that somebody doesn't, you know, get one over on us. It's going to make sure that we're not victimized, you know. And so we sort of think, yeah, my ego is kind of the thing that's keeping me safe. But in fact, and really what Rinpoche is talking about here is that the opposite is true. It's really the ego that is getting us into trouble. It's like the friend you had in school that always pushed things a little further and got you to do stuff that you normally wouldn't do, you know? Like, I remember things with our son, you know, getting a call from the police or whatever that he was up on the roof with some other boy, and they were of some house, and they were, you know, they were getting into naughty things. Who is the boy? He told us. Okay, that figures. It was always like that boy that got him, you know, it brought out his inner naughtiness, you know. And, you know, for a lot of us, that's kind of what our ego does for us, is it maybe doesn't bring out our inner naughtiness, but what it does do is makes us think of things in a way that's just going to cause us more difficulty and more suffering in the future, if that makes sense. So when we look at the ego, we're not talking about it as something that needs to be eradicated or beaten out of us, or that it's some evil thing, but really it's like, hey, this is kind of this component of our personality that is not entirely necessary. And so if we sort of get used to looking for it, and we get used to really questioning it, you know, what is my ego telling me? What are the stories that it's telling me? Are those stories helpful? Are they moving me in the direction of peace and freedom and compassion and love? Or are they kind of moving me in the direction of more greed and paranoia and kind of fear?
That's
and
how wars get started.
Well, yeah, and it's that. It's, you know, it's kind of, that's where the fear of other comes from. You have to have a strong sense of ego, which kind of makes you feel like you're very separate from everybody else, and you know, and so out of that, conflict can arise. So it's an interesting thing to just think about this ego as something that we deal with, and that it seems like it's our helper, but, you know, it seems like it's our best buddy, but a lot of times it's the one that talks us into doing the naughty thing, you know, setting the trash can on fire, you know, whatever it is, skipping school, doing the naughty thing. So you can kind of think of it that way. And not thinking of it in terms, again, not thinking of it in terms of some enemy that you need to drive out of yourself, but really this is something that it's almost more like just the light of awareness shining upon it is all it takes to make it sort of dissolve into nothingness. And then what's left is, okay, what makes sense? What's skillful? What's helpful? So that's where I get into the handout for tonight. And so you can access that while I take a drink. So we talk a lot about, and this one is entitled Cultivating Wholesome Desire and Using It Skillfully. There are two types of desire. And in our discussions, we talk a great deal about the problematic aspects of desire. The Pali word for this problematic desire is tanha, and that word translates literally as thirst. And this is the type of desire that manifests itself as attachment, clinging, craving, and aversion. It is problematic insofar as it causes dukkha. Dukkha is the Pali word for suffering. But it's not just intense suffering, it can be as much as just mild dissatisfaction, disappointment, disenchantment, agitation. It has a lot of meanings. And we usually call it suffering, and it makes sense, but it does mean more than just suffering. But this is the type of desire, this tanha, this thirst, that manifests itself as attachment. And so, for example, what is attachment? Attachment is the false belief that I must have something in my possession, whether physically or sort of mentally or psychologically in some way, that I must have this thing in my possession in order to be well or in order to be okay. And so you develop a tremendous amount of attachment around objects, around ideas, around other people. You can really be attached to anything. But it is this is an attachment that's brought about. It's a false belief, as is clinging, which is really kind of the same thing as attachment, wanting to hold on to things as they are, not being receptive to change, even though everything in the universe is subject to change all the time. And then there's craving, wanting things, and then there's aversion, which is not wanting things. And because craving and aversion are like two sides of the same coin, we include them in this list of things that are called attachment. But all of those are problematic insofar as they cause dukkha, or suffering, or dissatisfaction in some way, shape, or form. And that is the one thing that we probably all agree on that we're here for, is how can I get rid of some of that? The more of that suffering that I can let go of, when I do that, the more free I feel, the more love I feel, the more happy I feel, the more generous I feel. So that's an interesting thing to kind of ponder right there, is that when I suffer less, automatically these positive characteristics in me seem to manifest themselves. They just show up. So you can look at it as these negative things, these unwholesome desires, this tanha, these different attachments, they're obscuring what's underneath that wholesome love, that kindness, that joyfulness, that generosity. So, and anytime, feel free to ask questions or make comments, because it's always helpful, and I always appreciate it. The first noble truth is that there is this thing in life we call dukkha. We call it suffering. And that's the first noble truth. It's just saying that's a fact. It's there. Suffering happens to everyone. It's in everyone's life. So there it is. And it states it as if to say, now that we've established that, what can we learn about it and what can we do about it? And as obvious as it may seem to us, I mean, there is a certain amount of us, part of us, and certainly other people that kind of want to deny that. Well, no, life is not suffering. Life is not about suffering. And yeah, I agree, it isn't about suffering. But life contains suffering. And to the extent that it contains suffering, it's taking away our ability to really enjoy our lives. And whenever I can't enjoy my life, I also am unable to help you enjoy your life. So if you can imagine this state in which we could get rid of these attachments, and this natural goodness in you just seems to bubble up and flow out, because that's what's in there anyway. It's like you're digging a little, it's like in the beginning of Beverly Hillbillies, where he just dug a little bit, or he shot his rifle or something, and it was just enough to open up the surface of the soil, and out came all this oil, right? And then they were millionaires after that, and everything was fine. It's kind of the same thing. It's like the attachment is there. It's this thin crust. It's over everything, but it's just enough to kind of keep all that stuff tamped down. And man, when you get rid of that and you move it out of the way, you feel, wow, this other aspect of me that feels like the real me is coming out. This part of me that just, kind of wants to hug everybody and really feels a lot of love and companionship and is non-judgmental and all these wonderful attributes. So the first noble truth, it says that there is this thing in life that we call dukkha. We call it suffering, and that's a fact of life. The second noble truth says that dukkha is caused by tanha. So the suffering is caused by this irrational, ego-based thirst or craving or attachment for things, wanting to hold on to things, wanting to acquire more, associating our self-worth with what we own or what we earn or what we acquire or our social status or, any one of a million things. And I think everybody, kind of gets what I'm talking about here. Can come all the way down to the car you drive or the clothes you wear. And it depends on what kind of, probably where you're at. For kids, it's probably much more about the clothes they wear and the phone they carry and, maybe the car they drive when they're old enough. So it morphs as your situation changes socially. But the second noble truth, it says that the suffering is caused by that craving, that problematic or unwholesome desire. Tanha is not problematic because it's evil or sinful. And I like to point that out, that those words and their connotations, they're really not part of this practice. We kind of come from the Judeo-Christian background, and so so a lot of times those things kind of get a title like that, evil or sinful. But those connotations, those words, they're really not part of this practice in that meaning. Rather, tanha is looked upon as something unwholesome or unskillful, meaning that it throws the mind off balance or causes us mental torment, or it burns up huge amounts of mental and physical energy that could be focused on something wholesome or skillful. If you've ever had the experience of being particularly worried or upset or hurt about something, and the mind is just kind of running away with those thoughts, replaying them over and over, you realize how absolutely exhausting that can be. Like it just drains your batteries. It just sucks everything out of you. So that's what this, that's what tanha is like. It's a desire, but it's not a wholesome desire, meaning that think of food for a minute in this wholesome versus unwholesome. If you were hungry and you chose to eat some food, and here there's a plate of wholesome food, there's vegetables and there's all sorts of wholesome, balanced proteins and carbohydrates and fats and all this kind of stuff, very healthy and natural and no chemicals. And then over here you've got a plate of Twinkies and jelly beans and Doritos and stuff like that. And, either one may be appealing, but one's wholesome and one's not. If you eat the one with all the junk on it, you'll get the calories, but you're going to feel lousy. You're going to be shaken, you're going to be jittery, you're going to, you get the Dorito hangover and all that kind of stuff. And, so that's kind of the wholesome versus unwholesome. So these are just things, is this something that's good for me, sort of spiritually, psychologically, physically? Or is it something that's just not so good for me? Is this junk food in terms of, the stuff I'm encountering? Or is it health food? So that's what we're looking for, is the health food and not the junk food. The third noble truth tells us that when tanha ceases, when that thirst or that craving, that ego-based desire for stuff, when that ceases, that dukkha ceases, suffering ceases. And that is great news. Because first off, it means that it's worth getting up tomorrow morning because you got a shot. If it was just impossible, if it was inevitable, then it would be a different thing. What if it said, yeah, you know what, there's this thing called suffering, and just get used to it because it's going to be this way until the day you die, and, maybe you'll get lucky a little in between, but it's going to be horrible. But it's not saying that at all. What it's saying is that this is the problem It's like, this is the ailment as identified by your doctor. This is what's causing it. So here's the ailment. Here's what causes the ailment. All you need to do is remove the cause, and the ailment will cease to be, and you will heal, and you will be better, and you will feel better immediately, and you'll get stronger and healthier with each passing day, as long as you continue to not inject this tanha back into the equation. No tanha, no dukkha. So no craving after ego-based desires and attachments equals no suffering. And stopping it, even if it's in midstream, ends it. So wherever you are. So that's kind of part of this neat thing that we do in our meditation practice, which is becoming aware in many different ways that, hey, I'm having problems letting go of the pain in my back or in my knees or whatever it is. And we realize that we can change our relationship to that situation. We can let go of the aversion, the hatred or the anger or the animosity we have towards that. It changes our relationship to it. We can let go. And we take something that was harmful and we're able to convert it into something that allows us to move on. It's like you can go in peace now. The awareness can flow once again. The other word for desire in the Pali language is chanda. And chanda it's translated as desire, but it's often translated as intention, interest, or desire to act. So for example, when we come to our weekly meditation, it is an example of chanda. So there is a desire that brings you here. And so, again, all desire is not bad. All desire is not problematic. A desire to feed your children is not a bad desire. It's a wonderful, wholesome desire. A desire to help somebody who needs help, that's a wonderful desire. So just an example of chanda is us coming here. We have an intention to feel better, to find peace, to let go of suffering. It is our interest in enlightenment and freedom from suffering that brings us here. It is our desire to act on that intention that keeps us focusing and refocusing as we meditate and as we practice. So it's that very thing that keeps us trying. And after the 200th time that the mind has wandered away from the breath, that we still bring it back and we welcome it with open arms and we don't judge and we say, just return again, focus on the breath, focus on the movement of the breath, the touch of the breath, the sensations of the breath, let everything else go. And every time we do that, it's with an open heart and it's with a new enthusiastic welcoming. So we do that over and over, and it's that chanda that keeps that happening. So it's that wonderful, wholesome desire. There's a Danish scholar, Erik Pema Kunsang. In his translation of the word chanda, he refers to it as an interest or desire that supports the application of exertion. So there's an awareness that there's something that is wanted, something that is desired, but it also has with it this element of energy, enough to motivate us, to get us up in order to take action in order to achieve that. Because there's a lot of people who sit at home and maybe read the meditation flyer and they think, I should do that, I'd really like to do that, and they're sincere, but they don't make it, and it's because they didn't quite get that part, that chanda, cultivated to a point where they had the motivation to get here and make this thing happen. There's another a meditation master. This one is he's in the Thai forest tradition. Ajahn Suchito describes an eagerness to offer, to commit, to apply oneself to meditation is called chanda. It's a psychological yes, a choice, not a pathology. In fact, you could summarize Dhamma training, which is what we're doing here, Dhamma training, as the transformation of Tanha into Chanda. So what he's saying is that that's really our practice, is to look at the stuff we want and kind of filter the wheat from the chaff. This is the stuff I want that's just kind of ego-based, and it's not going to help me feel any better, and it's not going to help you feel any better, and it just kind of creates greed, and greed creates separation, and it creates distance because I'm worried about protecting what I have and keeping you from getting it, and or like Janine says, it's how wars are started, same thing. But just to quote him again, because it's such a perfect one, it is an eagerness to offer, to commit, to apply oneself to meditation is called chanda. It's a psychological yes. It's a saying yes inside of yourself. And it's a choice. It's not a pathology, meaning it's not something that just goes without you being able to control it. With a pathology, it's something that you really don't have a choice about, at least the way I understand it. So again, in fact, you could summarize Dhamma training as the transformation of Tanha into Chanda. So going around and looking at everything that you're wanting, everything that you're doing, everything that you're intending, and saying, is this going to help? Is this going to help someone? Is this good? Is this positive? Is this wise? And looking at it that way. And you'd be amazed that you can do that in a real seamless, just pretty laid-back way. I mean, it just flows. It's not like I really have to walk through with a clipboard and checklist and kind of go through a decision tree. I mean, this is just automatic stuff. You just get it because you've opened your spirit up to it. We could say, with regard to that pathological idea, we could say that much of the Tanha we experience, the thirst, the craving, the attachment, and that we subsequently act upon, it does have an element of pathology. Knowing that can help us discriminate in a skillful way. Because sometimes there are those things, and I like to use myself as examples because I know that a lot of the stuff that I have is the stuff that you have, or similar to it. But and eating is one of those things where I know if I have a big thing of ice cream, that I'm going to feel sick the next morning, and I'm going to feel guilty, and I'm going to feel bad about blowing my diet, and there's just going to be this whole group of things happening. I will enjoy the ice cream a little bit while I'm having it. I'll enjoy it a lot, actually, while I'm having it. But that's almost the pathological part. It's like this, I can't stop myself when I get into that, when I get into that mode. That's why I am not what is called a social drinker, because that's another thing. I don't do, 2 drinks. That doesn't work for me. I don't do 2 scoops of ice cream like my wife seems to be able to do somehow. 2 teaspoons out of a thing of ice cream and puts it back in the fridge. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? But so...
She knows she'll get into trouble if she eats it all.
Oh, but she could if she wanted to. She could if she wanted to. But, so there is almost this pathological element to some of the things we do to try and make ourselves feel better, have pleasure, and a lot of that, you can find that around experiences with food or sex or relationships or alcohol or chemicals. You just see that all over the place, and that's an example of that. The Abhidhamma Mataha Sangaha, I'll practice that one at home, states that chanda means desire to act, that is, to perform an action or achieve some result. This kind of desire must be distinguished from desire in the reprehensible sense, that is, from lobha, which is greed, raga, which is lust. It's not just lust sexually, but lust for stuff, lust for possessions, and or ice cream, yes, or Cheez-Its sometimes, Well, I guess I'll just say it. I went to Aldi and I bought a case of Cheez-Its. I have those in the basement. And I like their little Cheez-Its. So that's not skillful at all. That is a source of suffering that I'll deal with pathologically, but it'll give me stories to tell you later. But little things like that. But it says this kind of desire must be distinguished from the desire in the reprehensible sense, that is from lobha, which is the Pali word for greed, and raga, the Pali word for lust. Whereas the latter terms are invariably unwholesome, chanda is an ethically variable factor which, when conjoined with wholesome concomitants, can function as the virtuous desire to achieve a worthy goal. And then before even getting into the mental energy around a particular desire or the physical act of trying to achieve something, we should start to look at the root first. Like, is this desire, really taking a look at it, really being honest with ourselves, is this desire, and just contemplating it, is this desire, if I do this, is this something that's leading me towards freedom, or peace, or harmony, or liberation, or compassion? Or is it leading me towards feelings of ill will, or greed, or dis-ease, or imbalance? And, oh, thank you. She gave me the times are running out thing. Which is amazing. We're only on top of page 3, and we're already out of time. But we'll leave it there, and then next week we'll get into this 4 bases of power. You're certainly welcome to read ahead, but I want to describe these, and these are really useful tools for us to kind of put in our tool set for dealing with the world around us, and finding ways to be skillful in that, finding ways to avoid the tanha and instead operate with the chanda. So. But maybe leaving it with those thoughts, which is just the question, is the move I'm about to make, is this going to lead me towards harmony and peace and freedom and compassion and love? Or is it going to lead me towards feelings of jealousy and rage and being hurt and angry? Which is it? And then really making a decision based on that answer. Well, then is that something I want to pick up or don't I? And I have the choice. It's volitional. So this is fun stuff to work with, and I like when we kind of get into these little deeper pieces of the teachings, because they're helpful in a different sort of way. So we'll end.
Can I add a thought?
Please.
Because this idea of wanting something, and is it going to be harmful or is it going to be okay? I'm thinking about situations where there is something that I want, and in the end it's going to be okay, but the process of figuring it out becomes obsessive for me, and when I become obsessive, then I'm not very aware of the people around me and what their needs might be that I can maybe take care of, or at least.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I push others aside while I'm going crazy in my head thinking about this thing that really ultimately is going to be fine no matter what. But somehow I get caught up in lots of thoughts and then ignore people.
Sure. Well, I think there's some insight right there. That's some of that, that's awareness of, hey, I see myself doing this, and I see myself repeating this pattern, and I see how there is this, sometimes others are maybe not being treated the way I'd like to see them be treated as a result. See you later, Judy. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
So I think just having that sense of awareness, I think that's pretty important, because that really opens you up to being able to work with it in a different way. So I think that's great. That shows advanced discernment, and it shows that the wisdom mind is there looking. And the wisdom mind is objective. The wisdom mind is non-judgmental. And the wisdom mind allows you to evaluate yourself without your own ego kind of puffing up and getting in the way of that, you know. So it seems to me that you're able to say that in a way where your ego isn't blocking that, you know. But it's like, hey, I'm aware that this happens, which opens you up to, I think I can find a way to achieve the ultimate result, which is helpful and beneficial for everybody. And now let me see if I can do it in a way that doesn't leave any, you know, collateral damage in its wake, you know, or maybe I can find a way to include others in such a way that they actually feel part of the process, or, you know, something. But
Where does greed, like, they're talking about greed, but where does it fit in where somebody would think, oh, if I have this kind of car, then I'm better than the guy next door?
mm-hmm.
I mean, that kind of thing, that's a little different.
It is, but it's, you know, I mean, that's really a manifestation of greed too. And I used to have a pretty unhealthy dose of that myself. You know, there's this.
That I'm better, it makes me better if I have a better car, or if I have.
Mm-hmm.
But that's different than what we're talking about.
Well, there's, you know, it's kind of tied right into it. I mean, it's the ego saying, I want this because. And so it's that want, it's the thirst for, I want to be perceived as successful or wealthy or beautiful, or, you know, whatever the case may be, because I want to be, you know, I want to be on top. I want to be, you know, the better person. I want to be the chosen, you know, mate, or whatever the case may be. And so this creates a lot of problematic emotions, you know, in yourself when you're the one with that ego. Because then what happens if somebody has the nicer car, or what happens if your car is now a year older and it's not the car anymore, or, you know, so many of these different things. So that's the problem with this tanha type of desire in general, is that it fools us into thinking that it contains happiness. We get it, and it's like the expiration date is the moment we get possession of it, because that's the moment we see the next thing that's better. And so now we're dealing already with second best, you know, so we just never get there. So it's almost like knowing that ahead of time is the thing that allows us to overcome that. So.
Sorry.
No, that's great. I love those questions, but we'll pick it up with the 4 bases of power, and this is really a cool teaching to get into more. So I like to be able to kind of, when they get a little deeper like this, I like to be able to bounce them around so that, you know, yeah, so that people kind of get a sense
When
for
you're
it.
talking about the ego, then just look at the Bible. All these kings, their ego, all the wars that happened.
Oh, absolutely.
Right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is.
yeah, now the politicians, let's not even talk politics.
Yeah.
No, that's a dirty word.
We won't for today. So I'm going to stop this recording right now, and hopefully it'll work.